Be me, feminist warrior. I've been fighting the patriarchy since I was literally 6 years old when I realized boys got the cool Legos and girls got the stupid pink ones. Spent my entire adult life documenting and exposing male privilege in every form. Have a moderately successful blog with almost 800 followers, where I talk about the wage gap, hiring discrimination, and how women have to work twice as hard to get half as far. My whole thesis for my PhD was about how hiring managers discriminate against female names on resumes. Literally have charts and graphs printed out and laminated that I keep in my purse to whip out during arguments. Been rejected from exactly 47 jobs in my field over the past 8 years. Every single rejection is obviously because of sexism. Keep a detailed spreadsheet of every application, every interview, every rejection. Use it as evidence in my workshops about internalized misogyny and structural oppression. Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about all those mediocre men who got hired instead of me. They probably can't even spell patriarchy, let alone dismantle it. Whatever. I make decent money doing consulting work for companies that need to improve their diversity initiatives. Mostly I just tell them everything they're doing is racist and sexist and they pay me thousands of dollars. It's a living and it's important work. One day I'm scrolling through my feed during my morning coffee, which is fair trade organic obviously because I'm not a monster. See this video starting to make rounds. It's from some trans guy I vaguely remember seeing in online spaces a few years back. Used to be pretty active in feminist circles before his transition. We weren't friends or anything, but I recognized the name. Video is titled something like, "I applied to 500 jobs as a man and here's what happened." My interest is piqued because obviously this is going to be about how he discovered how brutal male privilege is. Finally, someone with a foot in. Both worlds who can confirm everything I've been saying. Click play, settle in with my coffee. He starts talking about how he transitioned 4 years ago, been on testosterone, passes completely as male, legally changed his name, decided to do an experiment where he applied to hundreds of jobs to compare his experience. I'm nodding along, expecting him to talk about how doors magically opened, how callbacks came flooding in, how interviewers treated him with more respect, how his salary offers were automatically higher. This is going to be perfect material for my next blog post. But then his tone shifts. He's getting emotional, starts talking about how he applied to over 500 positions in the past year and a half. My eyebrows go up because, okay, that's a lot of applications. He's tearing up now. Says something about how he never realized how hard men actually have it. Wait, what? He's literally crying on camera, talking about how when he was presenting as female, he got called back for interviews all the time, how companies were excited to talk to him, how he had multiple offers to choose from. I literally spit out my coffee. He's going on about how as a trans man with the exact same resume, he can't even get a call back. Talking about how he's sent out hundreds of applications and gotten maybe 15 interviews, how companies keep telling him he's not quite what they're looking for, how he sees women with less experience getting hired for positions he applied for. This man, and I use that term loosely now because clearly he's confused, is trying to claim that women have it easier in hiring. My blood pressure is rising. He's sobbing about how he never understood how disposable men are to society, how nobody cares if men are unemployed or struggling, how there are no programs or support systems, how he used to get sympathy when he was presenting as female, but now people just tell him to work harder. The comments under the video are even worse. Thousands of men chiming in with their own stories, talking about how they've sent out hundreds of applications, comparing notes on rejection emails, discussing how they've been told they're not diverse enough. Some of them are talking about how they see less qualified women getting hired because of diversity quotas. My hands are literally shaking. This is the most dangerous kind of content because it's coming from someone who supposedly experienced both sides. This is going to undo years of work. Years of carefully documented evidence of discrimination against women. I immediately start drafting a response in my head. This person is clearly dealing with some internalized misogyny that's manifesting as this bizarre self-hatred, or maybe he's just lying for attention and views. Probably got some alt-right funding to create propaganda. That has to be it. Men are always making up stories to pretend they're the real victims. I spend the next 3 hours hate watching his other videos. He has a whole series about his experience. Talks about how he used to blame the patriarchy for everything. How he genuinely believed women were systematically oppressed in every way. How transitioning completely changed his perspective. Describes going to networking events and being completely ignored while women get surrounded by people wanting to help them. Talks about reaching out for mentorship and being ghosted. mentions applying for grants and scholarships only to find out most are exclusively for women, discusses how lonely it is being a man because nobody checks in on you. This is all extremely problematic and I need to do something about it. I should write a response piece. No, wait. I should make my own video. I get out my ring light that I bought for virtual presentations. Set up my camera. Make sure my "Nevertheless She Persisted" poster is visible in the background. Spend 20 minutes doing my makeup because even though I'm a feminist, I still have to exist under the male gaze, unfortunately. Press record. Start explaining very calmly and rationally why this trans man's experience is not actually evidence of female privilege. Talk about how he's experiencing discrimination because he's trans, not because he's male. Explain that any difficulties he's having are because of transphobia from the patriarchy. Point out that his experience doesn't negate decades of research on hiring discrimination against women. Bring up my laminated charts. Cite studies about resume name discrimination. Mention the wage gap approximately 17 times. Record for about 40 minutes. It's good content. Really good. Spend 2 hours editing it to make sure I sound perfect. Add graphics with statistics. Include clips from my workshops. Upload it with a title about debunking dangerous myths about male privilege. Sit back and wait for the validation. Check my views obsessively for the next few hours. Only get about 30 views and 12 of those are probably me checking to see if it's rendering correctly. 2 comments. One is spam and the other is from my mom saying she's proud of me. Meanwhile, the trans guy's video has like 800,000 views and is trending. This is fine. This is just because algorithms favor male content creators. More proof of the patriarchy, actually. Over the next few weeks, this video keeps spreading. It's all over social media. Men are sharing it everywhere, saying things like, "Finally someone speaking the truth," using it as proof that feminism is based on lies. I'm getting angrier and angrier. Keep posting threads about why this is wrong and dangerous. Write multiple blog posts breaking down every claim. Reach out to my network of feminist activists to coordinate a response. We all start posting about how this narrative is harmful, how it's being weaponized by the manosphere, how we need to protect women's spaces and women's opportunities. But something weird starts happening. My consulting jobs start drying up. Companies stop calling me for diversity training. When I do get callbacks and mention that I specialize in addressing male privilege and centering women's voices, I get polite brush-offs. One HR manager actually says they're looking for someone who takes a more balanced approach. Balanced approach to dismantling the patriarchy? I'm livid. This is all because of that stupid video. It's poisoning the discourse, making companies afraid to actually address their discrimination against women. I decide I need to do something more direct. Find the trans guy's social media profiles. He's active on several platforms, mostly just talking about his experience and responding to other men. I send him a very carefully worded message explaining why his content is problematic. Tell him that he has a responsibility to not spread misinformation. Explain that his experience is not universal and he's actually harming women by giving ammunition to misogynists. Suggest that he needs to do more research on systemic oppression. Offer to send him some reading materials from my dissertation. He doesn't respond for 3 days. When he does, it's brief. Says something like, "I'm just sharing my experience. I'm not trying to speak for everyone." That's it. No engagement with my points. No acknowledgement of the harm he's causing. Typical male behavior, honestly. Even from trans men, apparently. I write a longer message explaining in detail why just sharing his experience is actually a political act. How his platform comes with responsibility. How he's being used by anti-feminist groups, whether he realizes it or not. This time he responds even faster. Says he's not interested in debating and he's going to block me if I continue. He actually threatens to block me. I'm trying to educate him and he's threatening me. I point out that this is exactly the kind of silencing tactic men use against women. He blocks me. Actually blocks me. I've never been so insulted in my life. I make posts about it on all my platforms. Talk about how this is evidence of male socialization. How even trans men benefit from patriarchal attitudes. Get a handful of likes from my followers, but nothing goes viral. It's so frustrating. Meanwhile, this guy is doing interviews now. He's on podcasts, talking to men's groups. His story is being featured in articles about men's issues. He's become this poster child for men's rights activists. Everything I've worked against my entire adult life. I keep trying to get media outlets to cover the feminist response, pitch stories about why his narrative is flawed, offer to write op-eds, suggest myself as an expert commentator to provide counterbalance, get rejected or ignored. by basically everyone. One editor actually tells me that the angle I'm proposing isn't relevant to their readership. Not relevant? The patriarchy is always relevant. I'm beginning to realize that I'm fighting an uphill battle, but I've never backed down from a challenge. Decide to do a deep dive investigation into this guy. Maybe I can find evidence that he's being funded by some men's rights organization. Spend hours going through his social media history, looking for connections to problematic groups, checking who shares his content, trying to find the smoking gun that proves this is all a coordinated attack on feminism. But I find nothing. He just seems like a regular person sharing his experience. His earlier posts from before transition are actually pretty feminist. He used to post about the wage gap and reproductive rights. Seems like he genuinely believed in the cause, which makes his betrayal even worse somehow. I expand my investigation to look at the data he's presenting. He claims he applied to over 500 jobs and tracked everything. Says he got callbacks for about 3% of applications as a male versus about 15% when his resume appeared female. These numbers seem made up. To have to be. I start looking into actual studies on this topic, fully prepared to debunk him with science. But then I find something that makes me uncomfortable. There are actually several studies showing that in certain fields, especially STEM and academia, women do get preferential treatment in hiring. There's research about how diversity initiatives sometimes lead to gender preferences, data showing that in some sectors, being female on a resume is actually an advantage. I feel sick. This can't be right. I keep digging, looking for the methodological flaws, trying to find the problems with these studies, but they're from legitimate sources, peer-reviewed journals, respected researchers. I tell myself that these are exceptions, that they only apply to specific fields, that overall, women still face discrimination. The wage gap is still real. Glass ceiling is still real. All of that is still true. But there's this small voice in the back of my head now. What if things are more complicated than I've been saying? No, that's internalized misogyny talking. I silence that voice immediately. I've dedicated my entire life to fighting for women's equality. My career is built on exposing male privilege. I can't start doubting now. That would mean everything I've worked for is based on incomplete information. It would mean I've been wrong. And I'm not wrong. I'm never wrong about this. Decide to go back to applying for jobs myself. I need to prove that discrimination against women is still alive and well. Update my resume with all my recent work. My speaking engagements about feminist theory. My publications on gender discrimination. My consulting work on diversity and inclusion. Apply to about 50 positions over the course of a month. HR positions mostly. Diversity officer roles. Academic positions in gender studies departments. Places where my expertise should be valued. I get 3 callbacks. 3 out of 50. That's 6%. Worse than what the trans guy reported as a male. But I'm not a man, I'm a woman, so this is obviously discrimination. The interviews don't go well. At the first one, they ask me about my approach to diversity and inclusion. I start explaining my framework for addressing male privilege and centering marginalized voices, specifically women and non-binary individuals. The interviewer, who is a woman herself, looks uncomfortable. Asks me how I would handle situations where men feel excluded or discriminated against. I explain that reverse sexism isn't real and that men's feelings of discomfort are just them experiencing equality for the first time. She writes something down. The interview ends shortly after. I don't get the job. Second interview is at a tech company. They're looking for a diversity consultant. I come prepared with presentations about how tech culture is inherently misogynistic. Talk about bro culture and how women are pushed out of tech spaces. Suggest implementing women-only networking events and mentorship programs. Propose diversity quotas that prioritize hiring women. The panel interviewing me includes 2 men and 1 woman. One of the men asks what programs I would suggest for supporting male employees. I'm confused by the question. Explain that men don't need support programs because they already have structural advantages. He presses the issue, mentions something about male suicide rates and workplace deaths. I tell him that's derailing and we need to focus on women's issues. The woman on the panel asks how I would measure success. I say, by the number of women in leadership positions and the reduction of male dominance in technical roles. They thank me for my time. I don't get that job either. A third interview is for an academic position. This should be a slam dunk. It's literally a gender studies department. These are my people. But during the interview, they ask about my research interests. I talk about my ongoing work documenting male privilege. One of the professors asks if I've considered intersectionality in my work. Of course I have, I say. I talk about how women of color face additional discrimination, how queer women are marginalized, how disabled women are overlooked, she nods, but then asks about men, about how race and class might affect men's experiences differently. I'm taken aback. Start to explain that while individual men might face challenges, they still benefit from systemic male privilege. She looks skeptical. Brings up some recent research about how working class men are actually falling behind in education, how boys are struggling in schools, how men are increasingly disconnected from social support systems. I counter that this is still ultimately caused by patriarchy and toxic masculinity, that men have created these problems for themselves. The interview feels tense after that. I don't get that job either. 0 for 3. This is fine. It's just bad luck, and probably discrimination. Definitely discrimination. But I'm starting to feel a creeping doubt. What if the trans guy was actually onto something? No, absolutely not. I push that thought away. Instead, I decide to try an experiment of my own. If he can do a resume experiment, so can I. I create 2 versions of my resume. One with my real name, obviously female. One with a male name, everything else identical. Apply to the same positions with both. Wait to see what happens. This is going to prove that women face discrimination. I'll get more callbacks with the male name and then I can write about it. Expose the bias. Vindicate everything I've been saying. Applications go out. I wait. Check my email obsessively. First callback comes in. It's for the female name. That's fine. Could be a coincidence. Second callback. Also for the female name. Third callback. Female name again. Over the next 2 weeks, I get 7 callbacks total. 6 are for the female version of my resume. 1 is for the male version. This doesn't make sense. I must have done something wrong. Maybe the positions I chose were biased somehow. I try again with different jobs. Same result. The female name gets more responses. I'm sitting at my desk staring at my laptop screen. My whole world is crumbling. Everything I've believed, everything I've taught, everything I've built my career on, it's not that it's wrong exactly. It's just more complicated than I wanted to admit. But I can't admit that. If I admit that, what does that mean? That I've been lying to people? That I've been taking money to teach companies about discrimination that might not exist the way I said it did? That all those times I didn't get a job, it might have been because I wasn't the best candidate, not because of sexism? No. There has to be another explanation. Maybe it's the specific field I'm in. Maybe HR and diversity roles prefer women. But that doesn't help because that's most of what I'm qualified for. I go back to the trans guy's content. Watch more of his videos. He's posted some follow-ups. Talks about how he's finally gotten a job after nearly 2 years of searching. Says he had to take something way below his qualification level. Describes the relief of finally having income again. Mentions how humbling the experience has been. Says he still supports women's rights, but he understands now that both men and women face different challenges. Advocates for addressing issues affecting everyone, rather than competing over who has it worse. The comments are full of men thanking him for speaking up, sharing their own stories of unemployment, talking about how invisible they feel, how nobody cares about their struggles. I read through hundreds of comments. Men talking about applying to jobs for years. Men discussing how they see less qualified women getting hired. Men sharing experiences of being told they're not diverse enough. Men describing how lonely and disposable they feel. Part of me wants to dismiss all of this as whining, as men being upset that they're finally facing consequences for millennia of oppression. But another part of me is reading these stories and seeing real pain, real human beings struggling. I think about my own male colleagues over the years, the ones I dismissed as privileged. Were they actually struggling and I just didn't care? I remember this one guy from grad school. He applied to over 100 academic positions and got nothing, ended up leaving academia entirely. I thought at the time that he probably just wasn't good enough, that he felt entitled to a job because he was male. But what if he was just going through the same brutal job market as everyone else? What if being male actually made it harder for him because universities were prioritizing diversity hires? I feel sick again. Not because I'm wrong, I can't be wrong, but because the possibility that I might be wrong is destroying everything. My phone buzzes. It's an email from one of my consulting clients. Well, former client. They're canceling the remaining workshops they had scheduled with me. Say they're going in a different direction. That's the fourth client I've lost this month. My income is basically gone. I should be applying for jobs, but I can't bring myself to do it. What's the point? I'm a woman, so I should have it easier, right? That's what my own data is showing me. But I'm not getting jobs. So either my data is wrong, or I'm just not good enough. And I can't accept either of those possibilities. I spend the next few days spiraling, barely eating, not showering, just lying in bed, scrolling through more of this guy's content. He started a podcast now, interviews other men about their experiences. They talk about loneliness, unemployment, lack of support, feeling disposable, topics I've always dismissed as men whining about losing their privilege. But listening to these conversations, they don't sound like privileged people. They sound like people hurting. One episode really gets to me. He interviews a guy who's been unemployed for 3 years, applied to over 1,000 jobs, has a master's degree, sees women with bachelor's degrees getting hired for positions he's overqualified for, talks about how he can't get a date because women won't consider unemployed men, how his family is disappointed in him, how he's considered starting over with a new identity just to have a chance. The desperation in his voice is real. I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Empathy for a man, not sympathy or pity, but actual recognition of shared human struggle. It's terrifying. My entire worldview is built on the idea that men are the oppressors, that they have it easy, that any problems they face are their own fault. But what if that's not entirely true? What if gender dynamics are more complicated than oppressor versus oppressed? I get up and look at myself in the mirror. I look terrible. But more than that, I look lost. My whole identity is wrapped up in being a feminist warrior, in fighting the patriarchy, in exposing male privilege. Who am I if I can't do that anymore? Who am I if the enemy I've been fighting is at least partially a phantom? My phone buzzes again. It's a message from one of my feminist group chats. Someone's posted the trans guy's latest video. Everyone's talking about how to counter his narrative, how to minimize the damage he's doing. Someone suggests trying to get his content removed for spreading misinformation. Another person proposes organizing a campaign to pressure platforms to stop promoting him. They're asking me to help since this is my area of expertise. I stare at the messages. These are my friends, my community, people who have supported me and my work for years. But I can't join this fight, not anymore. Because deep down, in a place I'm terrified to look, I know he's not wrong. I know my own experiments confirmed what he's saying. I know that my entire career has been built on a narrative that's at best incomplete and at worst false. I close the group chat without responding. Sit down at my computer. Look at all my materials. My presentations about male privilege, my workshops on gender, discrimination, my blog posts about the patriarchy, thousands of hours of work, all of it based on the assumption that men have it easy and women have it hard, all of it ignoring any evidence to the contrary. I think about that trans guy, how he lost everything, his community, his beliefs, his sense of identity, all because he was honest about what he experienced, how he had the courage to speak up even though he knew it would cost him. And here I am, too cowardly to even admit to myself that he might be right. I could make a video right now, could admit that I was wrong, could talk about what I've learned, could advocate for a more nuanced understanding of gender issues. But I won't, because that would mean giving up everything. My reputation, my career, my identity, my community. It would mean admitting that I've been hurting people, that I've been dismissing real struggles, that I've been so focused on my own narrative that I couldn't see the truth. And I'm not brave enough for that. Instead, I close my laptop and make myself some tea and decide that I just need to try harder. I need to find the right job where my skills are appreciated, need to find the right audience for my message, need to refine my arguments so they're bulletproof. The trans guy and his stupid video don't matter. My failed experiments don't matter. The declining client list doesn't matter. I'm right and everyone else is wrong. I have to be right. Because if I'm not right, then what have I been doing with my life? As I sip my tea, I can hear his words echoing in my head from one of his videos. Something about how the hardest part wasn't being unemployed. It was realizing that nobody cared, that as a man, he was invisible and disposable, that he had to succeed or fail entirely on his own. And I think about my own life, how many support systems I've had, How many programs and scholarships and opportunities were available specifically for women? How many people reached out to help me? How I've always had a community rallying around me. Things I've always taken for granted. Things I've claimed weren't enough. Things I've said don't make up for systemic oppression. But sitting here alone in my apartment, unemployed and running out of money, I realize that I'm not struggling nearly as much as a man in my position would be. I have friends checking on me. I have women's networking groups offering support. I have programs I could apply to. I have people who care. And I've spent my whole life complaining that it wasn't enough, claiming I was oppressed, claiming men had it easy. The tea tastes bitter. Or maybe that's just me.